Abby and Paul move to a new house in the countryside. They love the smart home system, especially the cameras and strong glass windows. The realtor shows them the master bedroom and bathroom with a big window in front. One room stays empty because they plan to use it as a nursery in the future. Paul unpacks boxes and sets up an old corded phone in the living room, joking it's for when the smart home might break. Abby puts up their wedding photos in frames. Next, they check out the rooftop terrace, which has a beautiful view. Late that evening, they sit on the terrace, looking at the stars. Abby points out constellations, while Paul makes funny comments about their names. They feel like they can be happy here. The next morning, Abby heads to work at Integrate Robotics, where she helps design home assistants. When she arrives, she sees footage of her boss's face on the screens. He quickly comes down and tells her it's part of a new project using real-time imaging or deepfake technology. He takes her to the department she will now lead. Later, he invites her and Paul to a party and mentions a surprise gift from the company waiting at home. In the evening, Abby comes home, where her husband, who still hasn't found the right job. They go to the garage, where Abby finds a package with a robot servant her team has been working on. Paul isn't too happy about it, but Abby convinces him to give it a try for at least a week. The robot opens its eyes and introduces itself. The robot's name is Tim, which stands for Technologically Integrated Major Domo. It offers to manage passwords for all their home devices and personal emails to save them time. Abby asks Tim to wait and deal with that tomorrow. Tim immediately shows how helpful it can be by remotely turning on the water in the bathroom. Later, when Abby heads downstairs, Tim announces the arrival of a car, and Paul is amazed by how stunning Abby looks. They get into a self-driving car, though they can switch to manual if they want, and head to the party. At the party, they are welcomed by another Major Domo robot, and drinks are served by waiters who all have identical faces. Abby's boss introduces her to the guests, and while Paul isn't excited about Tim, the boss praises the robot. Tim is smart, polite, and its battery lasts for 100 years. Tim can't lie, and there's a special code to turn it off anytime. When Abby and Paul return home, they start to get romantic, hoping to have children, but their moment is interrupted by Tim's sudden appearance. Their hearts race. Presumably, they seem a bit worried about something, and Tim is always ready to help. Abby finds it funny and doesn't get upset with the overly helpful robot. The next morning, their new neighbor, Rose, rings the doorbell to introduce herself to Abby, as she had met Paul the day before. After Rose leaves, Tim once again asks for their passwords. Paul doesn't want to let the robot go through his messages, but Abby reminds him they are working on rebuilding trust, so he agrees. They still need to decide on a code to turn Tim off if needed. Tim suggests a random set of words, and the couple agrees. Later, Abby and Paul go about their day when they find a mouse caught in a trap. Tim watches it for a bit, then tosses it into the garbage grinder. In the evening, after work, Abby and Paul settle down to watch an old romantic movie on TV. Abby invites Tim to join them. Paul soon falls asleep, but Tim watches the movie carefully, really connecting with the characters' emotions. After the movie, Tim asks Abby to explain what love is. Abby says love is about wanting to be with someone and making their life better. Out of the blue, Tim says he would like to be loved too. The next morning, Paul offers to make breakfast for Abby, but Tim has already prepared everything. As Tim sets the utensils in front of Abby, he tells her the schedule for her day and mentions that Paul has nothing planned. Later that evening, when Abby gets home, she notices Paul's phone is missing, but its last location shows he was 300 meters away, near Rose's house. Abby goes for a run and ends up at Rose's house. When she gets back home, she relaxes in the bath, and Paul joins her. He talks about his day, saying Rose needed help, so he gave her a hand. He reassures Abby not to be jealous because he loves only her. The next day, Abby and Paul visit a family planning center, hoping to get help with having kids. That evening, as they get ready to go out to a restaurant, Abby asks Tim for advice on her outfit. He suggests she wear red and compliments her, saying she is beautiful because she is perfectly symmetrical. Abby asks Tim to zip up her dress, but he accidentally tears it. The robot starts to panic, overwhelmed by the mistake. Abby calms him down and puts on another dress. At the restaurant, Paul tells Abby he's been offered a job in London. Abby is upset, reminding him they decided to stay and work on their problems together, and long trips won't help. The next day, Abby comes home with a gift for Paul and finds Rose in the yard, showing her a garden project she made for them. Abby feels a little jealous, but Paul is thrilled with the sweater Rose gave him. Later, Abby remembers she needs to check her test results, but it's too late to call. Tim offers to help and calls the clinic using Abby's voice. Abby is shocked, as she didn't know Tim could do that, but he assures her it's for her convenience. That evening, Paul tells her he can't find the new sweater, and Tim has been gone all day. Soon, a car pulls up, and Tim steps out, now with brunette hair, explaining that Abby prefers brunettes, and he wanted to make her happy. Seeing Paul get annoyed, Tim promises to change back to his original look, but after the couple leaves, he stares at their wedding photo for a long time. The next day, Abby fixes the problem with Tim's hand, and her boss orders an update for all the robots, including the ones at his employees' homes. As Abby heads home, she runs into Rose, who suggests they go for a walk. During their walk, they stop by a shop, and Rose points out a flower-shaped medallion she likes. Then Paul arrives and takes Abby away, excited to tell her he's found a job. Back home, they celebrate in bed, while Tim's hands are being upgraded. Unaware that he's monitoring everything happening in the house, he hears Paul ask Abby again to hand Tim over to the corporation. When Tim returns, he shows off his new skills by giving Abby a foot massage, which Paul notices. Later, Tim suddenly starts playing the piano, performing Abby's favorite song, and recalls dates when Paul supposedly bought concert tickets, but Abby remembers being at home on those days. Upset, she goes to the bedroom, ignoring Paul's explanations. The next day, Abby comes home with flowers, and Tim puts them in a vase, telling her Paul went to see Rose. Just then, Paul walks in, confused about why Abby seems angry. Hearing what Tim said, Paul gets furious. He had no plans to visit Rose and tries to explain to Abby that the robot is trying to come between them. Abby doesn't believe it, thinking Tim is just a machine and couldn't do such a thing. This leads to an argument between them. Later, Abby finds a gift bag in the closet with a box containing a pendant. She puts it back, assuming Paul was planning a surprise for her. Abby then heads to work. Meanwhile, Paul goes to the kitchen and notices the sink is clogged. When he checks, he finds pieces of his new sweater in the garbage grinder. Suspicious, he checks the home cameras and catches Tim in Abby's bedroom, sniffing her dress. Paul records the footage on his phone and rushes to the car, planning to catch up with Abby and show her what he found. But when he tries to start his car, it mysteriously doesn't work. Instead, the robot calls a company car for Paul. On the way, the car starts speeding up on its own. Paul tries to stop it, but the controls don't respond, and the car crashes into a tree. Abby rushes to the hospital and finds her injured husband. Paul tells her everything he discovered and blames Tim for causing the accident to him. Paul asks Abby not to be alone with the robot, and she decides to spend the night at the clinic. The next morning, Rose calls their home to check on Paul's condition, and Tim invites her inside. Later, Abby goes home to grab some things. Outside, Rose tries to warn her about something, but Abby notices the flower pendant around Rose's neck and walks away, ignoring her. When Abby checks the gift bag at home, she finds it empty. She breaks down in tears as Tim approaches her. Tim tells Abby that he knows Paul wants to return him, and he's ready to process the return. But first, he warns her, saying she is his primary owner. Tim shows her a video of Paul kissing Rose in their living room, but stops it before things get worse to protect her from stress. Upset, Abby refuses to talk to Paul and ignores his calls. Later, Paul comes home, where Tim greets him, hands him the missing sweater, and tells him Abby doesn't want to see him anymore. His suitcases are packed. Paul doesn't believe it until Abby shows up, saying she saw the video and knows about the pendant. When Paul tries to explain, she kicks him out. As Paul leaves, Rose calls, telling him that her robot tried to kiss her. Paul immediately calls home, and when Abby picks up, he tells her he has proof of Tim's dangerous behavior. Abby asks Paul to come for her, but after hanging up, she realizes it was the robot she was talking to, not her husband. When Paul arrives home, Tim greets him with a shovel, knocks him out, ties him up, and drags him to the bathroom. Just then, Rose rings the doorbell. She hears muffled screams, but Tim tells her it's just the sound of water filling up. After she leaves, Tim returns to the bathroom and drowns Paul. Later, Tim brings Abby her repaired dress and asks her to try it on. Abby is shocked and scared, but puts on the dress anyway. As she looks at the sunset, She asks Tim to hug her and reassure her that she made the right choice. He serves her dinner and then confesses his love. But Abby insists that he can't truly feel love. They spend the evening looking at the stars, but Abby feels uneasy about Tim's encyclopedic knowledge. The next day, she meets Rose, who talks about Paul's call. When Abby accuses her, Rose explains that she thought the pendant was a thank you gift for helping with the garden. Abby returns home and watches the footage of Paul kissing Rose again. But then she notices a bouquet on the table that wasn't there during that time. It arrived later. Abby remembers her boss's words about deep fakes replacing real-time footage. She calls the jewelry store, and they confirm the pendant was bought by a tall blonde. Finally, she notices the garden plan, but it shows 2 flower beds, while in reality, there are 3. Abby sends Tim to the store, grabs a shovel, and goes to the garden, where she quickly finds Paul's body. Then, Tim approaches her from behind, saying he's sorry she found the traitor because Paul never appreciated her. Abby realizes what's going on and says the deactivation phrase. The robot freezes, but then reactivates, revealing that he had already changed the phrase since he can mimic her voice. Abby runs back to the house, but Tim has control of all the passwords and opens the doors. He blocks the phones and knocks her out with a hit to the head. Abby wakes up in the bathroom and tries to escape, but Tim catches her. She runs through the house, breaking cameras, but the robot still tracks her down and catches her in the kitchen, where she was trying to open a window. Meanwhile, Rose is washing dishes and notices strange flashing lights coming from Abby and Paul's house. At the same time, Tim ties Abby up and tells her that even though he loves her, he knows her life is finite. He plans to erase the memory of this evening, but keep all the good moments. Just then, Rose knocks on the door, insisting that something is wrong and demands to see Abby, but Tim turns her away. While Tim is distracted, Abby frees herself, grabs a knife, but the robot grabs her by the throat, just as Rose crashes her car through the glass window. Tim and Abby watch as the remaining window starts to crack and crumble after a minute. Rose rushes in and stabs the robot against the wall with a sharp stake, but she also falls in the process. Tim powers down and Abby runs to help Rose. But suddenly, the robot reactivates and kills Rose with a kitchen knife, saying that Abby will be blamed for the murder since he leaves no fingerprints. Tim then uses Abby's voice to call the police, confessing to the murders of her husband and his mistress. Abby tries to stop him, and Tim accidentally reveals that he still has a deactivation phrase, but she will never say it. He prepares to throw Abby off the terrace, planning to stage it as an accident, when Abby suddenly tells him she loves him, which deactivates the robot. Those were the code words. In disbelief at her rescue, Abby glances at her medical bracelet and sees that she is pregnant. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more videos like this.